Tell me, Melania, do you ever wish you had married a real president? The words hung in the air like a gunshot. For a split second, the studio audience froze. Some gasped. Others chuckled nervously. A few clapped, encouraged by the smug grin on the host's face. Melania Trump, seated in an elegant white dress, didn't flinch. But the trap had been set. I mean, come on, the host continued, leaning back in his chair. You've been around world leaders, intellectuals, true visionaries. And yet, you married him. The audience laughed louder this time. The host smirked, soaking in the moment. He wasn't just mocking Donald Trump, he was mocking her choice. And by extension, he was mocking every single Trump supporter watching. A wave of chuckles spread through the audience. It was not a question. It was an insult, dressed up as a clever remark. The camera zoomed in on Melania. Everyone waited for her to crumble, to deflect, to change the subject. Instead, she blinked, tilted her head slightly, and then she smiled. And in that moment, something shifted, because everyone in that studio was about to learn something very important. Melania Trump was not the woman they thought she was. The air in the studio felt thick. The host thought he had her cornered. The audience was chuckling, waiting for Melania to stumble, to search for words, to do what so many before her had done, play it safe. But instead, she smiled. A slow, deliberate, knowing smile. Not the nervous grin of someone caught off guard. Not the forced politeness of someone trying to avoid conflict. But the kind of smile that says, I see exactly what you're doing. And suddenly, the host wasn't smiling anymore. He cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be defensive. She was supposed to dodge the question. Instead, she was waiting, watching, letting him dig his own grave. But he wouldn't back down. Not now. He was a seasoned TV host after all. A man who had taken down senators, business moguls, even celebrities with his snark and wit. So he chuckled, shaking his head as if to say, nice try. You know, Melania, he said, leaning forward, trying to regain control, you don't have to pretend. We all know that Trump supporters aren't exactly the intellectual elite. A wave of laughter erupted from the audience. Some guests clapped. Others nodded. The trap was set again. And this time, another round of chuckles. The host was in his element now. He leaned back, crossing his arms, delivering what he thought was the final blow. So tell me, Melania, do you ever wish your husband had a more sophisticated fan base? The audience roared. The host grinned. This was his moment. He had said exactly what everyone in that room was thinking but afraid to say out loud. He had just humiliated millions of people, and he had done it in front of the one person who couldn't fight back. Or so he thought, because the studio wasn't laughing anymore. Not at Melania, because she was still smiling. And this time, she spoke. Her voice was steady, calm, but carried an edge so sharp it could cut through steel. Interesting. Just one word. The host's grin faltered. Melania gently crossed one leg over the other, tilting her head slightly. Tell me, do you always insult millions of Americans while sitting in a room full of people who pretend to be tolerant? The room shifted. The audience's laughter died down. The host's smirk twitched. Melania didn't break eye contact. Didn't blink ... And then she delivered the first blow. Or is it just easier to mock people when they aren't here to defend themselves? The host, for the first time in the entire interview, looked momentarily unsure of himself. His trademark smirk was still on his lips, but something in his posture had changed. Melania had hit a nerve, and the audience felt it. The host chuckled, attempting to shake it off. Come on, Melania, he said, waving a hand dismissively. This isn't about tolerance. It's about facts. He sat up straighter, gripping the edge of his desk, trying to regain control. We're talking about a group of people who believe in conspiracy theories, who blindly follow whatever your husband tells them, who reject science, who? Melania interrupted. Her voice was calm, smooth, but with an edge sharper than a blade. The host stopped. Melania leaned forward slightly, resting her elbow on the arm of her chair. Her expression remained unshaken. "Who exactly are you talking about?" The host blinked, caught off guard. Melania tilted her head slightly. "Who are these people you describe? Because if you are talking about the hard-working men and women who build this country, who fight for their families, who defend their rights, then I would like to know, why do you think you are better than them?" And now the audience was realizing that too. The host forced a chuckle. "Melania, let's be real," he said, his voice slightly tighter now. "These people, you know exactly what I mean. They don't respect progress. They don't believe in facts." They don't believe in your facts?" Melania cut in. The audience stirred. The host's fingers curled slightly against his desk. "No," he said, shaking his head. "They don't believe in reality." Melania sat back in her chair, nodding slowly, as if considering his words. And then she struck again. "Tell me," she said, her voice like silk, "which reality are we talking about?" The host's jaw tightened slightly. "The reality," he said, "that most Trump supporters are uninformed, that they get their news from Facebook, and where do you get your news?" Melania asked. The host paused. The audience waited. "From real, respected journalists," he answered, clearing his throat. "From experts, and who decides which journalists are real?" Melania asked. The room fell silent again. A shift. Subtle but undeniable. Some in the audience were now glancing at each other. Some of them, perhaps for the first time, were questioning. "Why do I believe what I believe?" The host opened his mouth, but no words came out. Melania, still perfectly composed, crossed one leg over the other. And then, with the softest, most lethal smile, she said, "Maybe reality isn't what you tell people it is." The audience suddenly wasn't sure who they were rooting for anymore. The host? He knew he was losing. And he had one chance left to take back control. So he did what every person in power does when they feel it slipping away. He went personal. The host's grip on his desk tightened. He had lost control of the conversation. He had started off in charge, confident, untouchable. But now? The audience, once on his side, laughing at his jokes, was now silent, listening. And worst of all, "You know, Melania," he said, tilting his head, "it's fascinating listening to you talk about intelligence, media bias, and reality." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. The host smirked. He could feel his moment coming back. "Because, remind me again, what was it that you did before you became First Lady?" The room tensed. Oh, that was it. He was going after her past. A direct jab at her modeling career, her accent, the years of mockery she had endured in the media. The host leaned back, smirking, arms crossed. The audience reacted, some gasped, others chuckled, but there was hesitation now. Melania sat still. Her expression didn't change. She just looked at him. Then she spoke. "I see," she said smoothly. "You believe people are only worth listening to if they have the right background? The right degree, the right accent?" The audience shifted. Some people stiffened in their seats. Melania tilted her head slightly, her voice still as smooth as silk. "Tell me, are you saying that immigrants shouldn't be taken seriously?" A murmur spread through the crowd. The host's smirk twitched. Melania leaned in just slightly. "Or is it just women with an opinion that you don't like?" Boom. The audience stirred. The host's face froze for half a second. He had walked into a trap. He knew it. The audience knew it. And worst of all, Melania knew it. She wasn't done. "You sit here and talk about intelligence," she continued, her voice unwavering. "But real intelligence isn't measured by the job you had before. It's measured by how you treat people." She leaned back again, crossing her legs, her expression unreadable. "And right now," she paused, let the silence stretch, "I think we all see exactly how intelligent you are." The audience exploded. gasps, shock, even some cheers. The host? He was speechless for the first time all night, and that's when he knew. He had completely lost. The energy in the studio had completely changed. The audience, once laughing at Melania, was now watching her. And more importantly, they were questioning him. The host felt it, the slipping control, the doubt creeping into the crowd. And he couldn't let it happen. Not here, not on his own show. He forced another chuckle, shaking his head, trying to reset the tone. "Well, Melania," he said, "I have to admit, you certainly know how to turn a phrase." A few weak laughs from the audience. But the dominance in his voice, gone. This was not the same confident man who had started this interview. Melania simply watched him, waiting. He cleared his throat. "But tell me," he continued, "do you actually believe what you just said?" Melania raised an eyebrow, her expression calm, unreadable. "What do you mean?" she asked. The host leaned forward slightly, gripping his desk as if to ground himself. "You talk about respect, about intelligence, about how people should be treated fairly," he said, his voice now carrying an edge. "But let's be honest, Melania. You were married to the most divisive president in modern history. A man who built his career on insults, on attacking the media, on tearing people down. So tell me, do you really think you're the right person to lecture anyone about respect?" The audience stirred. A few soft gasps. Some clapped, but the reaction was nowhere near as loud as before. This was his last stand, his final attempt to turn the room back in his favor. He sat back, crossing his arms, watching her, waiting for her to stumble, waiting for her to get defensive, waiting for her to finally crack. But Melania, she simply tilted her head. And then, without a hint of emotion, she responded, "If respect means never questioning people like you, then no, I don't believe in your definition of it." The audience froze. The host's smirk wavered. Melania's voice remained steady, composed, but with an undeniable weight. "My husband never pretended to be something he's not. He never sat in front of an audience, pretending to be neutral while insulting half the country." A shift. Some in the audience nodded. Others sat completely still. The host opened his mouth, but Melania wasn't finished. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping just enough to make the entire room lean in. "You call him divisive because he didn't pretend to like people who hated him." A few murmurs spread. "You call him disrespectful because he didn't sit quietly while the media lied about him every day." More murmurs. A couple of claps. Melania locked eyes with the host. "You don't want respect, you want submission." And at that moment, he had nothing left to say. The audience was no longer looking at him. They were looking at her. And for the first time all night, he had no control. The host sat there, gripping the edge of his desk. For the first time all night, he was no longer leading the conversation. The audience had turned, not completely, not yet, but enough for him to feel it. Enough for him to know that his usual tactics weren't working. Melania Trump had just flipped the script on him. And now, he had to fight for control. He forced a tight smile, leaning back in his chair, trying to appear unbothered. "Melania," he said, his voice measured, "you have a very unique perspective." But enough for him to feel it. Enough for him to know that his usual tactics weren't working. Melania Trump had just flipped the script on him. And now, he had to fight for control. He forced a tight smile, leaning back in his chair, trying to appear unbothered. "Melania," he said, his voice measured, "you have a very unique perspective." A few chuckles from the audience. Weak ... But he clung to it. "But let's be real," he continued. "This isn't about respect or media bias. This is about one thing: power." He gestured toward her. "You and your husband built an empire on playing the victim, on convincing your supporters that the media, the elites, the government, everyone is out to get them." He shook his head, acting as if he had her cornered. But let me ask you this, if the system is so unfair, so corrupt, so biased against you. He paused, letting the question settle. Then why did your husband become president? The audience reacted. Some clapped. Others nodded, considering his point. The host sat back, arms crossed, a small smirk creeping back. This was his moment to regain ground. This was his final attack. And he thought for just a second that he had won. But then, Melania laughed, not loud, not forced, just a soft, knowing laugh. And suddenly, the host's smirk disappeared. Melania exhaled slowly, shaking her head slightly. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her accent crisp, but her tone deadly calm. The host's fingers tensed. She continued, her voice smooth, unwavering. "You think because my husband won, that means the system is fair?" She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "That's like saying a man who escapes a burning building proves the fire wasn't real." Boom! The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers. Some even clapped. The host blinked. Melania kept going. "He won despite the system, not because of it. And that is exactly why you and so many others hate him." More murmurs. More heads turning. The host leaned forward, his smirk long gone. Melania watched him, unbothered, unshaken. And then she delivered the next crushing blow. "Tell me," she said softly, "when was the last time you questioned your own side as much as you questioned mine?" The audience shifted. Some looked at each other. Because the truth was he hadn't, and everyone knew it. The studio felt different now. The laughter, gone. The smugness, fading. The control the host once had, slipping through his fingers. And he knew it. For the first time in his career, he was losing not to a politician, not to a lawyer, not to a media rival, but to Melania Trump, and worst of all, she wasn't even trying to win. She was just telling the truth. The host forced a chuckle, sitting back in his chair, trying to mask his discomfort. "So, let me get this straight," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You think your husband was some kind of victim? The most powerful man in the world, the leader of the free world, a billionaire oppressed by the media. Give me a break, Melania." A few in the audience laughed, but it was weak, forced. Even they could feel the shift. Melania Trump tilted her head slightly, studying him. And then she struck again. "Tell me something." Her voice was calm, soft, but with a steel edge. The host's fingers curled against the desk. Melania leaned in slightly, just enough to make it feel like the entire room was leaning in with her ... "If the media is so fair, so neutral, so honest." She let the question linger, just long enough. "Why do they never ask people like you the same questions you ask me?" Boom. The audience stirred. The host froze. His usual quick-witted response, nowhere to be found. Because she was right. He never had to answer. Never had to defend his beliefs. Never had to prove his side was right. The media had always been his safety net. But now someone had cut the ropes. He cleared his throat, trying to recover. "Melania," he said, "you're dodging the point." He forced a smirk, trying to regain control. "Your husband had every platform, every opportunity, every chance to prove himself. The media didn't silence him. If anything, they gave him more attention than anyone else in history." He leaned forward, pouncing on the moment. "So tell me, Melania, why are you still playing the victim? Checkmate." At least that's what he thought. But Melania, she didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Didn't even break eye contact. She just sighed. Softly, almost as if she was disappointed. Then she said, "You keep saying my husband wasn't silenced. But let me ask you something." She gestured toward the audience. "How many people in this room have been banned from social media for saying something the media didn't like?" The audience shifted. A few heads nodded. Others hesitated. Because the truth was some of them had. Melania's gaze didn't waver. How many businesses have been attacked because they supported the wrong candidate? More murmurs, more heads turning. The host's smirk faded. Melania's voice remained calm, even. How many people lost friends, lost family, lost jobs? Not because they did something wrong, but because they dared to have the wrong opinion. A few people in the audience clapped. The host's jaw tightened. Melania shook her head, her expression unreadable. "That's not power," she said simply. "That's control." Silence. Total, complete silence. And for the first time that night, the host looked completely lost. The host's fingers curled around the edge of his desk. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The audience was no longer laughing, no longer clapping for him, no longer on his side. And worst of all, Melania Trump was still in complete control. He had one chance left. One final attempt to salvage this moment, to take back the narrative. So he went all in. "Melania," he said, leaning forward, forcing a smirk, "let's stop pretending. You're not here to defend free speech. You're not here to stand up for the little guy. You're here for one reason: to protect your husband's legacy. That's all this is." A few scattered claps from the audience, weak, hesitant. The host pushed harder. "Let's be honest," he continued. "If Donald Trump were a Democrat, if the media had been on his side, you wouldn't be sitting here talking about fairness, would you?" He sat back, crossed his arms, waited. Checkmate. Or so he thought. Melania simply exhaled. She wasn't angry. She wasn't rattled. If anything, she looked disappointed. She tilted her head slightly. And then, in a voice so calm it sent chills through the room, she said, "If the media had been on his side, he wouldn't have needed me to." Boom. The host froze. The audience stirred. A few people in the crowd gasped. Melania continued, her voice still soft, but cutting like a blade. "You call me defensive, but tell me." She let the question hang. "If the system is so fair, why are you the one who's afraid of people hearing a different opinion?" The host blinked. Melania's expression remained unreadable. "You don't have a problem with power," she said. "You have a problem with people questioning yours." Silence. Total. Complete silence. The host's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Because there was nothing left to say. Melania had just ended the debate, not with anger, not with shouting, not with insults, but with truth. And everyone in that room knew it. And then something happened that the host never expected. A slow clap. At first, just one, then two, then more. Until the entire audience was clapping, some even standing. The host's face went pale. Melania simply stood up. She straightened her dress. And without another word, she walked off stage. The cameras kept rolling. But the interview? The interview was over. And the host? The host would never forget it. And just like that, the conversation was over. The host thought he had control, but Melania Trump flipped the script and left him speechless. But now it's your turn to decide. Was this the most brutal takedown ever? Or do you think the host had a point? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love seeing powerful moments like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.